Yes,
Are you allowed to
yes,
take
yes, yes.
the chair?
Yes, of course.
You want to?
It's a chair. When I first heard this poem, the last line made me gasp with surprise. They also confused me, as I think they meant to, because the right thing suddenly expands and the sky is open, promising something almost too weighty for the poet's argument to bear. And some of us has longed for a redemptive, defining experience of the word or the sword of the snow-white unicorn at the end of this poem represents. It is this longing that Shakespeare tapped into when he wrote his last plays. All that I have learned, I have forgotten. The little that I still know, I have guessed. When the sessions of sweet silent thought, I summon of remembrance of things past. I see a girl dragged by the wrist across a dazzling field of snow. She's cunning and playful, she's good with the money, and she can hold an academic discourse on love, men, marriage, and life, just like that. تبارك الذي جعل في السماء بروجا وجعل فيها سراجا وقمرا منيرا وهو الذي جعل الليل والنهار خلفة لمن أراد أن يذكر أو أراد شكورا وعباد الرحمن الذين يمشون على الأرض حونا وإذا خاطبهم الجاهلون قالوا سلاما. Okay. Welcome everyone to the space of to our lab, and space for experiment and experience. Thanks Sigfrid for their generosity and the Zentrum for sharing us this space. And I was thinking that where does the experience come from, and when do we stop or start doing the practice or an exercise, and what is the difference between them, and is it the desire that make of experience, or then what is it that gives us the idea to exercise things? Is there any desire in exercising anything? Is religion pure exercise, or is there any experimentation in it? Okay. Many years ago, the religion demanded us to sacrifice our bodies. And now science calls us to experiment on ourselves and our bodies, or maybe insects. But now the subject of knowledge has become its sacrificial object. Anyway, the experiment in the religion is not so much practiced. But right in the beginning of it, maybe the prophet did the experimentation of it, and I'm just gonna look at this first man who did the first experience, and everyone else later practiced and stopped doing it as a as a mind experience. So, but before that, talk about the prophet of this specific religion. I have to go a little back and talk about Arabia and what was it before Islam, and how did it change, and how did it change many people, neighbors of this country, such as myself. So the pre-Islamic Arabia was a nomadic tribes and brutal environment, hot, harsh, and the tribes would fight constantly with each other. And there were four things that the Islam later fought against or point his finger at. Was it the first was poetry, wine, the state of hygiene, and the unity of the Arabs, which they were pagans and dispersed in their identity, so they had to gather around one. Anyway, but let's look at them closely. The wine is constantly present, and it's been talked about, recited, and poetry written about it. And later in Quran cannot stop talking about wine and how bad it is. And I would say the book itself is wet with wine completely from beginning to the end. And starts also talking about the things that it doesn't like a lot, which I'd like to just look at them later. But what was interesting that I found about myself, that I wasn't daring to use the word Quran, so I changed it to Kitab, which means the book, and then I changed it back to Quran. But I will say, how did that happen? But go back a little step back again to the wine, to the poetry, which Arabs had amazing poetry before the Islam. Witty, smart, fast, improvised, and was much different than the Persian poetry. In Persia, they wrote poetry to remember the smell of the flower when there was no flower. Okay, you might say it's a metaphysics. Yeah, metaphysics want things in front of it as it's there, so they wrote about it. But the Arabs, they had a different. They were satirical and on the move poetry that was good to be sung while you're riding a horse or in a fight in a bazaar. So they had amazing festivals. The poet come from around the city or around the country, and they would fight with words against each other, improvise and take care of each other just with words. It was amazing. It was a space for exchange, language, and slaves, and to trade things. But the thing is that the language that I'd like to later come to it and talk about it was exactly made here. So the language of Quran or the Kitab was not made in the divine lab or in the scientific lab. It was forged by the drunken, high on hashish Arab in the immediate performing his poetry, and this language is being used later. So, but what is important that these poets, they were so high that they have people around them that they would recite their poetry and explain them, because they were so fast and so improvised, they couldn't do it themselves. So they were just pure energy, motor, creative work, and there was someone around them to later just slow down. Okay, let's have a pause and let's talk about this. And they would recite the poetry, change it a little bit, read it, reread it, explain. Okay, is it translation? I don't know. But these reciters were trained by others, reciters by others. So it was a generation of people training other people to recite someone else's poetry. And I think it's pretty cool the way it will connect later to the Islam, how these practices will come about, and the hygiene, and people in Arabia were extremely dirty, extremely. I mean, you couldn't come close to an Arab because there was no so much water, and they would travel, move around, and fight, and make love, and they wouldn't clean themselves. So horrible smell. So one of the things that Muhammad did was that clean up the asses and clean up the tongue of the pagan language, the word. So the whole, if you look at it a little bit wrong from my side, look at Islam, it's about really this cleaning up, and most importantly, just uniting them, because they were constantly against each other, and so the force became one under a religion that he created. So I would say, or someone else might say, that the Arab society was slowly growing from their patriarchal society to a feudal system slowly, and Islam was perfect. It was an idea that would bring everyone together based on an ideal and conquer the whole world, the damn world. And it's crazy. So anyway, let's go back to our prophet, and imagine a young man, beautiful, handsome man with beautiful voice, and he would sit in the street and perform his poetry, and people would listen to him when he was singing. And he was a traveler, he was a merchant, so he would travel a lot around and talk to people that would trade, that would come with the caravan from, the line was from Yemen to Syria, which was cut later by Persia, so they hated Persia and they attacked later, but that's another story. So he would be in the point of the traffic of the caravans, sit down, listen. He was a man who was interested in conversation, would sit down with people, different idea, talk, and there was also there at the time a tribe that they were worshiping already as one God, Allah, and he thought, okay, let's work with this material. So he would continue on this tradition precisely to create his project, which I will come to it very soon. So all this I'm telling is happening in Mecca, a small city in the middle of desert, but has a very interesting thing, a monument in it. A huge cube size of this building is a pagan shrine, which everyone from the Arabia and also from other countries' neighbor would come and worship their gods there. It was the oldest shrine ever in that region. It was extremely sacred. And imagine a huge cube in the middle of desert. And in the architectural sense, it's something that it wouldn't reveal itself suddenly. It appears in the horizon. So you would come in a desert and you would encounter this black, huge cube. Anyway, and all sorts of gods and goddesses were worshipped inside. It was an orgy of gods inside this shrine, and people around it. So it was considered sacred, so they wouldn't fight each other. It was a war-free zone. So people would come around here, trade, perform the poetry. They would put the poetry on the wall. Now it's pure recitation. Now it's on the wall of this cube. There's no poetry. But anyway, so the Kaaba itself was a deity. It was a female deity which would men naked do a rumgang or a cycling around it. And it's very interesting that when Muhammad took care of everything, he came back to Medina with huge force, with an army. It's very interesting that he didn't touch the Kaaba, and he made it actually the center, the most sacred of his religion. And what he did, he closed the door. So we don't know if he took the idols or the gods out, but the door was closed, and I would say the interest for those dazzling creatures, the whereas the interest was still there. And how could a few thousand-year-old sacred focus suddenly change its meaning? I would suggest it cannot happen just like that. So it's a very, and it's not by chance that the Mecca is a subtitle now. It's called Beit al-Haram, that which means the house of the sinful. And why is that? Why is the most sacred is the most sinful of them all? Anyway, and this is the architectural landscape of this small historical oeuvre, but yeah. So, but the change of this society from the nomadic patriarchal to the feudalist, and the creation of classes between them wouldn't happen years later after they conquered the whole area. So still everything happens very, very slowly, but it happens in the Muhammad's life. Muhammad was a military commander. Let's face it. He was genius in the battle. He was a politician from the beginning. He wasn't like the Jesus who would give his body to the humankind. And okay, the suffering and pain of the Jesus on the cross give the Christians a way to think about space of I don't know what let's call it. I don't know, charity. I don't know, but the Muhammad life wasn't that. He married lots of women. He killed a lot of people, married, and he was an activist, total activist, and his life is a horrible example if you want to leave it. But his word did it, which was written in the book. So the word and the voice who reads it became an exceeding importance in the later history of Islam. It's just a theory of mine. I would say the word played the role of the image of the Christ in the. But maybe you cannot compare them. But you cannot do it later. We can talk about it. But this word became extremely important and has a very magical, crazy, and energy around it. So I would, when I was remembering this stuff, I would also feel it with, oh, should I touch it? And I felt the nervous vibe in my body that remembered, okay, I'm coming from education, and I'm just trying to remember my education. And okay, you might say that, am I forgetting something, or by performing my remembering, am I truly forgetting it? But I just remember my body, and the way I changed the name of the Quran to the book or the kitab, so I can play with it, do experiment with it, and maybe later we can put Quran back into kitab. But also the orientation of my body to the Kaaba, which I have to face it, not put my back on it. And I still remember that I wouldn't touch the words. It was not allowed. I would. I still fear the fear of touching the sacred words of the Kitab, and it also had a satanical energy around it. My teachers told a story about that if you put Quran in a horrible situation, dirty, like let's say in a toilet, you will get satanic energies. So I'm still terrified by it. I mean, who would thought of that other than my teacher, who would? Okay, you can say, is any teaching a trauma? But we try to remember and forget them at the same time. And okay, this memory was very important because Muhammad never wrote a word in his life, and the first thing that the God told him, or the first communication that he had with the God, was actually to read. Iqra wasn't to write, to read. God damn it! And what does it mean to read and to reread? Or was the God meant to read what? To just perform reading, or just to go ahead and translate things, push your translation to the limits? And this iqra becomes very crucial, because what if reading was a little bit pervert, or what happens here? Okay, let me just give you an example perverse reading of the iqra, and what if we can misunderstand it, or okay, I hope no one is a Muslim here. Okay, it's just me. Okay, and so the reader, okay, let's call it the reader, is very soon becomes from the performance poetry guy in the middle of the pagan bazaar with sexy slaves and trade exchange, will transform soon to a reciter, someone who just recites Muhammad's and the little bit of touch of his own translation. So the recitation becomes a huge deal. So people reciting Quran, their teacher teaches teachers, so they're teaching upon teaching how to memorize and perform Quran later, or recite it in different situations. And this is extremely important. Muhammad did a lot of things with just singing Quran. He got, okay, you might say it was a failure, but in 13 years, 100 people. Okay, he mesmerized people just by walking in the city and singing Quran. Seriously, that's how he gathered his first followers. And later, when he's forced to leave the city and he goes to Yathrib, and how he convinced the king not to slaughter them, send their heads back to Arabia, he sings just 2 verses. And the king is totally convinced that, oh, hey, come, I will convert immediately. I don't know, but its voice will continue to gain its power. I give an example, which might you know Rumi, the great Persian mystic poet. You know him, yeah? Oh yeah. And he was actually a great reciter. He would sit down above, people gather, and he would talk in prose, not in poetry. So, and he was good at it. And there's the text about it. And he would perform it, improvise it right in front of the people. But he would later go to his chamber, write his poetry, which is now his best work. So his calm state, choosing the word in his loneliness, would become his major work, not his performance later. So this is an example of it's not always the case. So his recitation is also very interesting. We can look at it later. And his speech acts and how he crafted it. So going back to the reader or the reciter of the kitab, they were called Ravi. And Ravi now has a very interesting meaning right now. It means a standpoint in a story. Who the reader's standpoint in literature, now it's called Ravi. And I find a very interesting transformation of the meaning of this word from someone who is acting as an ambassador for someone else, and later become an important structural way of telling a story in literature. So was Muhammad himself an ambassador of God, or the other people who played ambassador for him? Or he would send constant ambassadors, citers, who would just go to countries, recite Quran, convert people without further ado. So this ambassadorial activity is interesting, because by chance it also, in Greek, it also comes from theater, which is also telling a story from your ambassador of something from other time, other space, and you bring it to the eyes and the ears of the beholders. But with the ear, there could be a fetishistic study, the ear fetish that we can, I would like to look at it. But the eyes and the ears were where they come from. I was thinking about my own genealogy, my ancestors and my parents, my eye and ear, and when you think about it, it's you're raped basically. Your ancestors, you're all children of someone being raped back in the history. So I would say that this coming of this sexual aggression, and it's coming and through generations and creating my ear, and okay, let's forget this, and let's go back a little bit to the Iqra and the role of the voice in the Islam. So from this crazy importance, I'd like to just connect it to my neighbor in Iran, an old lady, which when I go and knock at her door, he would open the door, he would call behind her door, and she would put her finger in her mouth and talk like this. So her voice is changed. So I wouldn't recognize her as a sexy voice. So I think it's also very significant how she changed her voice, coming from through this history of voice performing to this moment that she put her finger in her mouth. But a little step back again to the state of hygiene, and the Muhammad also not just the rules. There are specific rules how to clean yourself in Islam. A lot of them, and emphasized, repeated a lot, and I like to connect it to something very interesting, which is called taking a shower. And I'm thinking, how would taking a shower where does it come from, and how do I learn to take a shower? From my parents when I was a child, and when did they learn it? But it blew me away when I showered with a stranger, and I realized that how profound was it when my body went through a different history suddenly with water and the temperature and the closeness of another body. So taking a shower with someone whose body was different than me rocked my religion totally. So I would just suggest as a religious experiment, trying it out if you dare and you like it. Thank you. Okay, we can hang around here a little bit, and don't be shy. There are cool students, and the Siegfried also, there are very cool artists here. I'm sure the conversation will be fruitful for both sides. So we can leave immediately, or we have time, we can hang around downstairs, talk to students or your staff. Okay, thank you.
But it was open. I thought it was solid. And what is it made of? What is the thing? No, it's big stuff. Have you seen it? Yeah, I'm going.
Just that.
Yeah, because people work. But they're against like kindergarten as well.
Performance.
And the key.
I was wondering what they're doing there. Because when the phone was over, everybody flipped my corner. Some big So are you going to go and put it down in solitude on your most important work? Because this was about Islam and the free form. So you said Rumi did that, and then he went home and sat down. So will you write it down? You just did I'm just asking how much time.
So?
Then the voice. But then others can recite. Kind of safety. It didn't sound like Sina when you sing it. The words from the Quran. And is it Arabic? It sounded like someone else. So the motivation, the melody, that's all given. The melody is yourself. But the melody has a also, and what was the problem in the beginning? Comment which ending was so heartbreaking? No, what was it?
I wrote this to
And is it Shakespeare's fault? No. Get that.
Okay, the Shakespeare, the beginning was a little bit
Yeah.
and the Shakespeare was interesting.
So maybe you have to write it on.